The courtroom was filled with murmurs as the young girl stepped forward. She looked no older than 17, her dark brown hair neatly tied back, her eyes steady but carrying the weight of something deeper. She wore a simple navy blue dress and carried a worn-out leather folder in her hands. The contrast between her youthful appearance and the seriousness of her posture made some onlookers exchange skeptical glances. Judge Leonard Thompson, a man known for his impatience, leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "This better not be a waste of time," he muttered under his breath before speaking up. "Miss, what was it again?" "Madeline Carter, Your Honor," the girl responded with surprising confidence. The judge sighed, flipping through the documents in front of him. His expression changed to one of mild irritation. "This is nonsense. A minor presenting a case in my courtroom? What kind of joke is this?" A few chuckles echoed in the room, but Madeline stood her ground. Her fingers tightened around the folder, and her voice remained steady. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm not here as a joke. I'm here to represent the person whose voice has been ignored for too long." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "And who exactly are you representing, Miss Carter?" Madeline took a deep breath, then looked straight into his eyes. "I'm here to represent my father." A hush fell over the room. The judge's smirk faded, replaced by a look of curiosity. The case had just taken an unexpected turn. The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Your father?" he repeated, almost as if testing her words. "Miss Carter, this is a courtroom, not a family reunion. What exactly is the case you're trying to make?" Madeline stood taller, her hands now clutching the folder tightly. "My father was wrongfully convicted. He was sentenced to prison for a crime he didn't commit, and the evidence they used against him was fabricated." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, but the judge's eyes remained locked on her. "And you're, what, a lawyer now?" "No, Your Honor," she said softly, her voice unwavering. "But I've spent the past 2 years studying every document, every file. I've spoken to witnesses who never had a chance to testify. I've uncovered the truth." The judge narrowed his eyes. "How old are you again? 17, if I recall correctly?" Madeline nodded, but her expression didn't falter. "I know it seems impossible, but I've made sure everything I've brought here today is solid. I believe in my father's innocence." A scoff came from the back of the courtroom, followed by another chuckle. "What a joke," someone muttered. But Madeline didn't flinch. Instead, she opened the folder in her hands, revealing stacks of papers and photographs. She slid the first document forward. "I have the original evidence, proof that the key witness lied under oath." Judge Thompson glanced at it briefly, his skepticism evident. "You expect me to believe this? You're a teenager with no formal legal training, presenting what you call evidence? I've seen better attempts at defense from first-year law students." But something about her unwavering belief, her determination to right the wrongs, began to stir something in the judge. He couldn't quite place it. He'd seen plenty of frivolous cases, but this felt different. Madeline continued, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "It's not about me, Your Honor. It's about making sure the truth comes to light. My father didn't deserve to lose his life for something he didn't do." The judge paused, his fingers tapping lightly on his desk. The room was still, all eyes now on Madeline. It was clear that she wasn't backing down. The judge sat in silence, his brow furrowed, as he scanned the documents Madeline had placed in front of him. His usual skepticism had been replaced with something else, a quiet curiosity. The courtroom was still, almost holding its breath, as everyone waited for his reaction. Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair, but his eyes never left Madeline. "So, you've got all this evidence," he said slowly, his voice laced with doubt. "And you expect me to just take your word for it? Do you have any idea what you're up against?" Madeline didn't hesitate. "I do, Your Honor, but I've been fighting this battle for 2 years. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for a chance to present the truth." Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. The judge studied her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. She wasn't like the others he had seen come through his courtroom, those who made baseless claims or sought attention. This was different. He let out a sigh, rubbing his temple once again. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what you've got." Madeline nodded, relieved, but the weight of the moment was far from over. She stood a little taller, glancing at the audience before turning back to the judge. She slid another document across the table, this one more official than the rest. It was a letter, signed by a former investigator who had worked on her father's case years ago. The investigator had come forward, having discovered crucial evidence that had been deliberately ignored during the trial. This letter, Madeline explained, her voice now gaining momentum, was sent to the district attorney's office just days before my father's conviction. It reveals a hidden piece of evidence that could have changed everything, but they chose to bury it. The judge's eyes narrowed as he read through the letter, his expression shifting slightly. This is serious, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Madeline kept her focus on him. It's not just serious, Your Honor, it's a travesty. My father was sentenced to 15 years based on a lie. He's been in prison for over 3 years now. The room was so quiet that it felt like even the air held its breath. The judge's face had softened, the edges of his hard exterior starting to crack. He knew he had to take this seriously, even if it went against his instincts. Madeline leaned in, her voice steady but emotional. I don't care how old I am, Your Honor. I'm here to fight for my father's life, and I won't stop until the truth is known. Judge Thompson sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He'd never had a case quite like this before, and for the first time in a long while, he wondered if perhaps he had underestimated the girl standing before him. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence, as Judge Thompson carefully looked over the evidence Madeline had presented. He had seen many cases over the years, some more straightforward than others, but none like this. There was something about her. Her unwavering determination, the way she spoke about her father as though she could still feel him with her, even from behind bars. He cleared his throat, glancing around the room. This is all compelling, Miss Carter, he said, his voice softer than before. But there's still one thing that doesn't sit right with me. Madeline raised an eyebrow, her posture still confident, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What's that, Your Honor? Judge Thompson set the papers down, his fingers tapping nervously. I don't understand why you, a teenager with no legal experience, are the one standing here in front of me. Why hasn't any lawyer or professional picked up this case? Madeline's gaze didn't waver. They wouldn't listen, Your Honor. The people who knew the truth were either too afraid to speak up or simply turned their backs. No one would stand with my father. The judge's face softened for a brief moment, but his skepticism remained. And yet, here you are, alone, with all this evidence. If you're telling the truth, why hasn't anyone else come forward? For a moment, Madeline hesitated, her chest tightening. The room held its breath as she considered how much to reveal. Then, in a quiet but steady voice, she said, Because the people involved are too powerful, too connected. Judge Thompson froze. What do you mean? Madeline's gaze never left him as she spoke. The man who helped convict my father, the one who fabricated the evidence, he's been covering up the truth for years, and he's not just anyone, he's someone you know well, Your Honor. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the words sank in. The judge's face changed, his eyes narrowing as realization dawned on him. Who? Madeline took a deep breath. Your own colleague, Judge Peterson. He was the one who pushed my father's case through, despite all the red flags. He was the one who ignored the truth and buried the evidence. My father's life was ruined because of him. A gasp echoed through the courtroom. Judge Thompson stared at her, disbelief written across his face. Judge Peterson, are you certain? Madeline nodded, her eyes unwavering. I am. I've seen the records, the emails, the conversations that were never made public. He's been covering up his mistakes for years, and my father paid the price. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. His mind raced, but one thought kept echoing. Could it be true? Could his colleague, someone he had known and worked with for years, be capable of such corruption? Madeline stood firm, the weight of everything pressing down on her. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm here for the truth. I'm here because my father didn't deserve this, and I won't stop until justice is done. Judge Thompson took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling. The case had just become something much larger than he had anticipated. The stakes were no longer about a minor and her father's conviction. It was about something much deeper. something that could shake the foundation of the very court system he had devoted his life to. The courtroom was alive with whispers now. Even the stenographer, who had been diligently typing every word, seemed to hesitate in her work, unsure of what would come next. Judge Thompson, who had always prided himself on his control over the courtroom, found himself at a rare loss for words. Madeline's claim was bold, shocking even, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit in a way he couldn't ignore. He leaned forward, his fingers still gripping the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. "Judge Peterson?" he repeated quietly, almost as if testing the name in his own mouth. "Are you telling me you have proof? Proof that my colleague is involved in this conspiracy?" Madeline nodded, but there was no arrogance in her gesture. Only resolve. "I have the records, Your Honor." The emails he exchanged with the district attorney, the transcripts of the phone calls made between him and the key witness in my father's case. Everything that proves he knew what was happening and allowed it to continue. The judge looked at the documents in front of him again, his mind racing. His fingers trembled as he read through one of the emails. The language was clear. It was a plan to ensure that the wrong man was convicted, to close a case quickly and sweep the truth under the rug. Judge Thompson's jaw clenched. The evidence was damning. He had known Judge Peterson for years, trusted him, worked alongside him on countless cases. Could it really be true? Was his colleague capable of such a betrayal of justice? The room fell silent as he looked up from the papers. His voice, when it came, was low but filled with authority. This is treason to the very justice we swear to uphold." Madeline's expression softened, but there was a fire in her eyes. "It is, Your Honor, and that's why I'm asking you to do what's right. You've spent your career making decisions based on the law. Now, you have to make one more. Will you let the truth be buried, or will you expose it?" Judge Thompson closed his eyes, the weight of his decision pressing on him. He had always believed in upholding the law, in making decisions that served justice. But now, he faced a choice that was more complicated than any he had made before. Exposing Judge Peterson meant implicating someone he had known and respected. It would mean risking his own career and reputation. But as he opened his eyes and looked at Madeline, the image of her standing there, so young, so determined, he realized that this wasn't about politics or pride or self-preservation. It was about something much greater. He stood slowly, his voice calm but unyielding. "This case is no longer just about your father's conviction. It is about the corruption that has infected this very court system. I will not allow that to continue." Madeline's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly, a wave of relief flooding through her. For the first time in years, she felt like her fight had been worth it. Her father's name was about to be cleared. Justice was going to be served. Judge Thompson turned to the bailiff, his voice steady. "Call an emergency hearing. Get Judge Peterson here. We need to address this immediately." As the bailiff rushed to carry out the order, Madeline stood in the middle of the courtroom, her heart racing, but her spirit lifted. She had done it. She had brought the truth to light. And now, there was no turning back. Minutes later, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. The judge's decision had sent ripples through the room, and everyone was on edge. Madeline's heart raced in her chest, her palms clammy as she stood by the table. She couldn't shake the feeling that, while this was a victory, it was only the beginning. Judge Thompson paced slowly in front of the bench, his mind clearly preoccupied. The door to the courtroom opened, and a figure stepped in, Judge Peterson. His confident stride faltered for just a moment as his eyes met those of Judge Thompson, but he quickly regained his composure. "Your Honor," Judge Peterson greeted, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I was told there was an urgent matter to attend to." His gaze flicked to Madeline, then back to Judge Thompson. Madeline stood straight, her heart thundering in her ears. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when everything would come crashing down for the man who had destroyed her father's life. Judge Thompson didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sit down, Judge Peterson," he said, his tone sharp, his authority unmistakable. "You've got a lot to answer for." Judge Peterson raised an eyebrow, but he sat down, his expression hardening. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice now laced with a hint of unease. Madeline stepped forward, opening the folder in her hands. She slid the documents across the table, her eyes locked on Judge Peterson's. "You've been hiding the truth for far too long," she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "And it's time you were held accountable." Judge Peterson's face turned pale as he scanned the documents. The emails, the phone records, the detailed accounts that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had been involved in manipulating her father's case. His eyes flicked from the papers to Judge Thompson, a flicker of panic crossing his face. This is absurd," he stammered. "You don't understand. These documents are fabricated. They're not fabricated." "Judge Peterson," Madeline interrupted, her voice unwavering. "I've seen the original records. I've spoken to the witnesses you tried to silence. You were the one who ensured my father was convicted for a crime he didn't commit. And now, you'll pay for it." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Peterson's face twisted into something between disbelief and anger. "You think you can take me down with a few papers?" he spat, his voice rising. "I've been doing this for decades. You have no idea what you're up against, little girl." Madeline didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm up against. I've spent years uncovering the truth, and I won't stop now." Judge Thompson finally spoke, his voice cold and unyielding. "I've spent years working alongside you, Peterson, but I won't let your corruption stain this courtroom any longer. You're finished." Judge Peterson's face twisted with rage. "You're making a huge mistake," he growled. "I can destroy you, Thompson. I can ruin your career in an instant." But Judge Thompson stood his ground, his gaze steady. "You've already destroyed yourself. You've been caught, and now you'll face the consequences." The weight of his words hung in the air as the courtroom doors opened, and law enforcement officers stepped inside. They approached Judge Peterson, their faces grim. Madeline watched in silence as Judge Peterson was escorted out of the courtroom, his face contorted in anger and disbelief. The man who had tried to bury the truth was finally being held accountable. Judge Thompson turned to Madeline, his expression softening for the first time in the entire ordeal. "You did it," he said, his voice quieter now. "You were right all along." Madeline looked at him, her heart still racing, but the relief in her chest was undeniable. "It's not over yet," she replied. "My father still needs to be exonerated, but we're getting closer." Judge Thompson nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "You've done what most people would never have the courage to do. You've brought justice back where it belongs." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Madeline felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. But beneath it was a sense of victory, a feeling that she had finally done what she set out to do, to expose the truth and ensure her father's innocence. And this was just the beginning. In the days that followed, the courtroom buzzed with rumors. Judge Peterson's arrest made headlines, and the news of the corruption within the court system spread like wildfire. Madeline found herself thrust into the center of a media storm. Cameras flashed wherever she went, and reporters scrambled to get statements from her, her family, even her teachers. But Madeline didn't care about the attention. She was focused on one thing, and one thing only: her father's freedom. The fight wasn't over yet. She sat at the kitchen table late one night, going over the final pieces of the case. The documents had been presented. Judge Peterson was behind bars, but her father was still in prison. It was time to push for his immediate release. Her mother walked in, a gentle smile on her face, but her eyes were filled with worry. "You're still at it, huh?" she said softly, sitting down across from Madeline. Madeline nodded without looking up, her eyes glued to the papers in front of her. "I can't stop now, Mom. We're so close. I have to make sure they know the truth." Her mother's expression softened. I know you've worked so hard for this, but don't forget to take care of yourself, okay? Your dad will come home. I believe that." Madeline looked up, meeting her mother's eyes. "I know, Mom. I won't stop until I get him back, not after everything we've been through." The next morning, Madeline stood in front of the court again, this time with her mother by her side. The judge who replaced Judge Peterson, a woman named Judge Morgan, looked down at Madeline with a somber expression. "Miss Carter," Judge Morgan began, her voice soft but firm. "We've reviewed the evidence presented in the case, and the facts are clear. Your father's conviction was a miscarriage of justice. Based on the new evidence and the charges against Judge Peterson, we are hereby reopening the case." A wave of relief washed over Madeline, but she knew they weren't done yet. This was just a preliminary decision. She had to ensure that the case was dismissed and that her father would be freed without delay. As the days passed, she continued to work tirelessly, meeting with lawyers, reviewing documents, and ensuring that the truth would not be buried again. She had one last meeting with the prosecutor handling the case. "I've reviewed everything, Miss Carter," the prosecutor said, his voice reluctant but respectful. "It's clear that your father was wrongfully convicted. We're prepared to drop all charges and petition for his release immediately." Madeline felt her heart leap in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. The prosecutor nodded, his tone more solemn. "This is the right thing to do. But don't forget what you've done here. It's nothing short of remarkable. You've fought for your father when no one else would. You've fought for justice, and in the end, it will be served." Madeline's hands trembled as she walked out of the office, her mind still processing what had just happened. It was almost too much to take in. Her father, after all this time, was going to come home. That evening, as she sat in the living room with her mother, the phone rang. Madeline's heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. It was the prison. She quickly answered, her voice tight with anticipation. "Hello? Miss Carter?" The voice on the other end was kind, but businesslike. "This is Warden Pierce. I'm calling to inform you that your father's conviction has been overturned. He will be released this evening. Please make the necessary arrangements to pick him up." Tears filled Madeline's eyes as she clutched the phone. Thank you so much." She hung up and turned to her mother, her voice breaking as she said the words she had longed to say for years. "Mom, Dad's coming home. He's coming home." Her mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her. "I knew it. I always knew." And so, after everything, after the countless hours, the doubt, the fear, Madeline had done it. She had brought her father home. The fight was over, but the battle had changed her forever. The truth had triumphed, and justice had been restored. But for Madeline, the real victory was knowing that sometimes the strongest warriors come in the smallest packages. Thank you so much for watching this story. I hope you enjoyed it and felt the emotions behind every twist and turn. If you did, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with more exciting stories like this. Your support means the world, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to share this with your friends too. Let's spread these powerful stories together. Until next time, stay tuned for more.